This fishing trip started at 3:50 in the morning. While most normal people were still sleeping, I was already loading the car, picking up my fishing partner, and heading toward a mountain lake in Albania called Topana Lake. The plan was simple. Find a quiet spot, scan the bottom with a deeper sonar, use flat feeder rigs, feed the area properly, and hopefully catch carp, grass carp, or crucian carp. At least that was the plan. But as usually happens in fishing, the lake had its own plan for us. There was a homemade barrier on the road, a dam covered in bushes and thorns, a bait boat stuck 100 meters away on the opposite bank, a walk through a wild forest, spiders everywhere, muddy streams, and finally, me swimming across the lake in May to rescue the boat. And after all that, the biggest fish of the day was not even mine. So this is the story of my last fishing trip at Topana Lake. We left early in the morning, before sunrise. The destination was Topana Lake, a large mountain lake not far from Durrës, Albania. According to the navigation, the drive should have taken about 35 minutes. We chose this lake mostly by looking at Google Maps. From the satellite view, it looked promising. There were several interesting banks, a dam, some deeper-looking areas, and even a point marked directly on the map as a fishing spot. There was also a sign near a local restaurant saying that the lake was created in 1978 and had been stocked with fish like carp, grass carp, and zander. For a fisherman, that sounds like an invitation. So our target fish for the day were carp, grass carp, and crucian carp. We brought rods, flat feeder rigs, a deeper sonar, ground bait, a cheap bait boat, and enough gear to make the walk back to the car feel like a full-body workout. Our first idea was to drive to the point marked on Google Maps as a fishing spot, but when we arrived, we found a large homemade barrier blocking the road. It did not look like an official barrier. It looked more like something local people had built themselves to stop cars from driving closer to the water. We drove around for a bit, looked at the area, and thought about walking from there. But then reality kicked in. We had bags of ground bait, rods, chairs, the bait boat, water, food, camera gear, and all the usual fishing equipment that somehow looks light at home, but suddenly weighs 100 kilos when you have to carry it uphill. So we decided to try another location on the same lake, the dam. The dam was not the answer. The dam looked good on the map, but in real life, it was not comfortable for fishing at all. The banks were covered with bushes, thorns, and wild growth. There was almost nowhere to sit. Only one small spot on the side of the dam gave us access to the water. I will show this place on the map because this was actually my first fishing trip where I brought a camera and a drone. And, of course, because it was my first attempt, I kept forgetting to turn on the camera. Even better, I brought the drone, but forgot the controller at home. So yes, the first video on a new fishing channel is always a little bit terrible. But don't worry, there will still be real fishing footage in this story. At the dam, we started scanning the bottom with the deeper. The sonar showed fish, which was encouraging, but the place still had too many problems. The dam was covered with sharp stones, and there was a long pipe blocking the right side of the lake. Casting and landing fish there would have been uncomfortable, maybe even risky for the rigs. So once again, we packed up and moved. We returned to the homemade barrier, and then we realized it was actually not difficult to lift. To be clear, it did not look official. There were no signs, no clear warning, nothing that looked like a proper legal restriction. It looked more like something placed there by locals, maybe to keep cars away from a good fishing spot. So we lifted it, drove through, and moved about 400 meters closer to the water. This is where the real fishing trip finally began. The road down to the lake was rough, but the view was beautiful. Topana Lake is a very peaceful and atmospheric place, surrounded by Albanian mountains. In the early morning, it felt quiet, wild, and full of promise. This was the kind of place where you immediately start thinking, there must be fish here. Once we reached the water, we walked along the bank with the deeper sonar, trying to understand the bottom. We were looking for fish, depth changes, and especially the first drop-off. After checking the area, we decided to move slightly to the right of the road that went down to the lake. For the closer rods, the distance was around 35 meters. At that distance, we found a nice edge. The bottom dropped from about 3 meters to 5 meters. The deeper also showed fish close to the bottom. That was enough to give the spot a chance. My fishing partner decided to fish that closer distance. I had the bait boat, so I wanted to test the far bank as well. The opposite side of the lake was about 100 meters away. It had grass, quiet water, and almost no disturbance. My idea was simple. Bigger fish, like carp or grass carp, might feel safer near that bank. So while my partner worked the closer drop-off, I started using the bait boat to take my rig and feed across the lake. For ground bait, we used a sweet mix. There were crushed sweet biscuits, corn flour, canned corn, oat flakes, and some 2mm sweet corn pellets. For the flat feeder, we added a bit more pellet and method mix to make it more attractive around the hook bait. The hook bait was an 8mm wafter. I also cooked 1 kilo of chickpeas for bigger fish. The idea was to put them into the bait boat and create a feeding area with larger particles, hoping to keep small fish away and attract better carp or grass carp. In theory, it made sense. In fishing, a lot of things make sense, in theory. Then, the lake decides what actually happens. After all the rods were placed, there was nothing left to do but wait for the bite alarm. And then, it finally happened. The first small carp came from the 100-meter spot on the far bank. But the bite was strange. It was not one of those clear, screaming runs where you instantly know there is a fish on. It was more confusing. For a moment, I could not understand if there was really a fish on the hook, or if the line had just gone slack and triggered the alarm. But yes, there was a fish, not a monster, not the dream carp, but still, the first fish of the session. At that moment, I thought the far bank was going to work. I was wrong. After the next delivery, the bait boat got stuck in the grass on the opposite bank. At first, I tried to free it using the remote. Forward, backward, left, right, nothing worked. The boat was stuck, so I decided to walk around the lake and get it from the other side. And that was my biggest mistake of the day. From our bank, the opposite side did not look too far. It looked possible. But once I entered the forest, everything changed. The trees and bushes were thick. The trail looked old and barely used. There were ferns everywhere, difficult terrain, and a ridiculous amount of spiders under my feet. Then I had to cross a small stream. The bottom was covered with clay, and my feet were sinking into it. At that point, I started to question my life choices. I kept trying to reach the right place, but the terrain was much more difficult than it looked from the water. After walking through the forest, climbing around, crossing the stream, and fighting through the bushes, I still could not reach the bait boat, so I had to turn back. The boat was still stuck. And now, there was only one option left. The distance was exactly 100 meters. The date was May 19th. The water felt warmer than the Adriatic Sea, but still, swimming 100 meters in fishing clothes because your bait boat is stuck is not exactly the dream fishing moment. But what else could I do? So I went into the water and swam across to rescue it. This is what I looked like after getting the boat back. At least the boat survived. My dignity, maybe not. After that swim, the far bank completely switched off. I tried to send the rig there again. I tried to feed the area again. I tried to rebuild the spot. Nothing. No more bites. I probably scared every fish in that area by walking, splashing, and swimming around the opposite bank. So, my 100-meter big fish strategy died right there. Luckily, my fishing partner's closer spot started to come alive. The action moves to the close range. While my far bank went silent, the 35-meter spot near the drop-off started producing bites. Small carp came first, then crucian carp, then something much bigger hit the rod. It was so strong that it almost pulled the rod away. For a moment, it looked like a serious fish, heavy, powerful, and not easy to stop. But unfortunately, that fish got away. That is fishing. Sometimes the biggest fish of the day is the one you never actually see, but later my partner managed to land a beautiful bream of about 2 kilograms. Finally, a good fish on camera. The feeding mix was based on grains, corn, sweet ingredients, and pellets. The chickpeas were there for bigger fish, but the bigger carp or grass carp never came. The smaller fish were active, especially on the closer edge. My far bank idea was logical, but after the bait boat incident and my swim, that area was finished. Sometimes the simplest spot is the best one. My partner fished the closer drop-off, stayed consistent, and got more action. I tried to be clever with the bait boat and ended up doing open water rescue operations. My own result was very modest. One small carp, around 400 grams. My partner had a lost powerful fish, one nice bream, and plenty of smaller fish. All the carp were released back into the lake. The crucian carp and the bream were kept. So it was not a trophy session, but it was definitely not a boring one. We explored a new lake, tested different spots, learned the bottom, caught fish, lost fish, rescued equipment, and got a story out of it. And honestly, that is what this channel is going to be about. Not perfect fishing. Real fishing. The kind where plans fail, gear gets stuck, the camera is sometimes off, the drone is useless because the controller is at home, and somehow you still come back with a story. One important thing. Later, we found out that fishing at Topana Lake is currently not allowed. A man from a nearby winery told us that fishing was prohibited there, although he did not clearly explain the reason. My guess is that the lake may be rented or privately managed, and maybe that barrier at the entrance was there for a reason, after all. So, our next fishing trip will definitely be in another location. If you plan to fish in Albania, always try to check local rules before fishing a lake, especially if there are barriers, signs, private businesses, or people managing the area nearby. The drive back to Durrës took longer than the morning drive. In the morning, it was about 35 minutes. On the way back, because of traffic, it took around 50 minutes. We were tired, wet, slightly disappointed, but also happy, because even a difficult fishing trip can become a good story. So, that was my first fishing story from Topana Lake in Albania. Next time, I promise to remember the drone controller. I also promise to turn on the camera more often, and hopefully the next trip will bring not only a better story, but also a bigger fish. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy real fishing trips, quiet places, unexpected problems, and the story behind every catch. Because I try to catch fish everywhere I travel, and every fishing trip has its own story.